Should I ever go back to England, I may well look back on America in exactly the same light that I'm looking back at Britain right now, with nostalgia and with this sense of almost longing for the good old days, right? Hello, what do you consider home? And I am asking you that question, but it's also a question that's been posed to me on numerous occasions, particularly in the last few months. And, that's because, of course, in the last few months, I revisited the place where I grew up, that being England. I've lived in the United States, though, for the last 11 years. So that question seems to me to be particularly difficult to answer, I think, with any sort of accuracy. But then how do you define home, I suppose, is one of the sort of key sub-questions of this question, which I think is an equally hard question to answer, isn't it? I mean, I think broadly speaking, we all live in the universe. We could consider the universe itself to be our very home. If you want to narrow that down, we could consider the Milky Way to be our home, or indeed even the solar system. As far as I'm aware, no human has left this solar system except for Matthew McConaughey and friends in Interstellar. So when E.T. famously said, E.T. phone home, if I was Elliot, I would have demanded a greater level of specificity. I can't just pluck a number out of my arse and dial, can I? Because I don't know I don't know what you consider home, E.T. You're supposed to be all intelligent. Oh, look at me, advanced alien moving to Earth. Can't even give directions. It's embarrassing. But the thing is, home is hard to define in many ways. I mean, you ask yourself the same question. What do you consider home? It could be that you, as an American, have lived in multiple places in the United States. How do you pick one? Do you pick the place where you grew up? Do you pick the place where you currently are? Do you pick the place where your heart is? Your heart is, it's technically in your chest or area around there. So I don't live inside my body. This isn't inner space. That's another film reference. But when you take the saying "home is where the heart is," it's easy to think that is the place where you grew up, because it sort of formulated a lot of your views on the world and some of your early feelings about life. So your nostalgia is in that place. You may have only lived in one place your whole life. It's a bit easier perhaps for you to answer it. But firstly, is home a house? Is it a house? If home for me is a house, then I suppose instinctively the feeling is it's the house I grew up in Grimsby. That's what I would call home. But at the same time, this current apartment of mine that I've only been living in for 3 years and practically hate because it's so tiny is still sort of home. It's where I go home to at the end of the day. I could consider this to be home. It's where I currently live. But ask me that question in sort of 60 years' time when I'm 97, which is possible. I've just started eating asparagus, so, anything could happen. Then I'll have a broader view and a better understanding of that nostalgia. I'll be able to look back, so long as my memory is still intact, at not just my childhood, not just the years that I lived in Chicago, but everything that's still to come, right? The place that I consider home now might well change in that 60 years' time. I mean, imagine if I actually do settle down somewhere, anywhere, don't know where yet, and that place for the rest of my life gradually becomes what I consider home. Now, in this particular scenario, I'm really talking about the building in which I might live and addressing that as home. But of course, as I pointed out at the top of this particular video, home carries many meanings, sometimes broader meanings. So in that sense, which of the two countries do I consider home? This was the real question that was posed to me ahead of my trip to England, or in fact during my visit to England. Do I consider England or America to be home is essentially what was asked of me. Truly difficult question to answer. It really is. Going back to England, I definitely remembered certain things about the country that I'd since forgotten, having lived here so long and become so ingrained in an American way of life. I could almost argue for that 11 years, I started again, really. I mean, moving to America, that's what happened. I started life again. And so in many ways, in fact, for different reasons, I could put forth the argument that both America's my home and England's my home. I have two homes. I'm rich. No, that's not true. But in this sense, one or the other could be. So let's break down how and why, right? So England, obviously, the place that I grew up, it's where I did get my start in life. It's where I learned the basics about life, It's where I learned who I was to some degree and what I wanted to do. It gave me my accent, right? I think it gave me my sense of humour. Not that America doesn't have a sense of humour. I don't want to, go down that argument again, but there's a certain British sense of humour, so I got that from it, and so therefore I'm very appreciative that that's something I carried with my being. This is getting really, really pretentious now, if it wasn't already, talking about the universe and all of that. And so in that sense, I carry Britain with me every day. And certain other traits as well, sort of the politeness tactics that are very British. And just those sort of basic things. Now, going back there just recently, like I said, there were certain things that I forgot existed about English life. And they're hard to put my finger on because they're more a feeling than they are a thing, I suppose. When you're there, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the pace of life. Maybe it is the way of life. Maybe it is the way of people. But somehow my demeanour feels different when I'm over there. I don't know why. I don't know how it happens, but it just does. Maybe it's because I'm sinking back into something that I was very used to before, and therefore speaks to a sense of home, a place of home. That was in my old life, though. An old life that I just said I have carried to this new destination. And this new destination is America, on the other hand. And in this sort of secondary life, as it were, I learned to become an adult, I think. I didn't learn that so much in England. I was sort of piddling about, I think, in my 20s when I lived in England, going from job to job, apartment to apartment, and all of that. And not really getting a full understanding of how the world works in the sense of how do I survive and how do I become successful in any capacity. That's something I learned in America, and I think America taught me that. It gave me that sort of reach for the stars mentality. However true that is, the fact that it's even spoken about here really did urge me to, I think, become more of a confident person and more of perhaps a go-getter, but still maintaining that former sense of humour that I got from Britain. So it's kind of an amalgamation of the two. In other words, I didn't become a shit. I just knew what I suddenly realised what I wanted, and I was able to go for it. And I think America just sort of gave me that confidence. And everybody loved my accent, so that helped. But at the same time, maybe it's unfair to answer this question from the point of view of having lived in the US for the last 11 years, because there's going to be somewhat of a bias toward my answer, I suppose, in that's the one I remember the most from the point of view of it being my home. I'm trying to eradicate that bias from my answer here as best I can, and just compare the two situations. I have family, my own immediate family, of course, back in England, and you can't replace that. And so I think, when I was back in England, I did get a strong sense of feeling at home when I was genuinely at home in Grimsby and around my family. But of course I was around my family, Matt, my brother, in London too. So I had that same sense there. I think often home could be determined by the people that are in your life. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the other people, the people that you've grown to trust and like, they can formulate, I think, your opinion and your basis for saying that one is home over the other. I will say, I think that some of my closest friends in the world, either in America or in England, are in England. I think if you took a sample, there's a bigger sample of them in England than there are in the US. I don't know why that is. I think maybe it's because I became more driven, actually, when I moved to the US, that I felt like I got so busy that I didn't have time for a social life, and therefore didn't build up the circle of friends that I did previously, when I was just happy to sit around and drink beer after beer after beer and talk about, well, actually, the universe and things like that. So I suppose in that sense, England wins there. I don't know if I'm keeping a tally running here. Hopefully I am. That said, though, I do have family here in the United States, as in Tara's family. And, over the last few years of me being here, we've gone through all sorts of celebration and commiseration and even tragedy that, really, really hammered home just how close I am to Tara's family. And so that's something I've developed too. Not only have I lived two lives, but I've had two families in a sense. And so weirdly, even though I'd never want to live there ever again, going back to Anderson in Indiana for Christmas or whenever it might be, sometimes feels like coming home, because I lived in Anderson for 4 years. I even lived with my in-laws for a little bit until they couldn't put up with me any longer. And, that was home for a time. I think all that to say that should I ever go back to England, I may well look back on America in exactly the same light that I'm looking back at Britain right now, with nostalgia and with this sense of almost longing for the good old days, right? And to want to return there as quickly as I could, not leave it 11 years like I did with England. Because that's something that I definitely found going back to England, is that 11 years was too long. So I think with all that in mind, I don't really think about America with a broad degree of emotion. It's more from a professional standpoint, and just sort of day-to-day living. It's where I live right now. It's where I've built up my career, and it's been great. It's been an absolutely wonderful part of my life, whereas it's very easy to look at my home of England with that sense of emotion, with that sense of almost longing, I suppose, and see home from that point of view. It's hard to split them up, but one other question that I've had recently from quite a few of you is, having gone back to England, can you see yourself moving back? And maybe this answers the wider question of this video, but the answer to that question is yes. We definitely got this strong feeling while we were out there that I could see us moving back and being happy with doing so, especially now that we've grown up, that we're more adult. I think when we lived there, I was probably too immature to appreciate what I had. I think if I were to leave here, though, like I said a moment ago, I am mature enough now to appreciate what I have here, and so I'll miss it. I'll miss what I've left behind. But sometimes these things have to happen, and we've moved about so much. We've lived in Lancaster together, we've lived in London, we've lived in Anderson, Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, Chicago, that I don't think Chicago is our last destination. I just get this feeling, especially since we're still renting. We're in an apartment that's way too small for us, so we definitely want to move out of this apartment. And whether or not that next move is to England, I don't know. Actually, I don't know. But I do know this. If I go back to England, even if I call it home, I'll still apply that same word to America. Thanks for watching. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.